These are some NBA stars that vanished, and to start out, let's look at Victor Oladipo, who had quite the run back in his prime. After breaking out as a junior at Indiana University, shooting 60% from the field, Oladipo was the second overall pick to the Orlando Magic in 2013, and his career started off as planned. He averaged 14, 4, and 4 and came in second in Rookie of the Year voting to only Michael Carter-Williams, and it was looking like he was going to be a problem for years to come. He was an elite two-way guard with an explosiveness that you just can't buy, and he gave some hope to Magic fans that were looking for a new leader since Dwight Howard moved on. And in his second season, he was looking even better. He was shooting more efficiently and scored 18 a game. But another event that season which helped him grow his status was when he came in second in the 2015 dunk contest to only Zach LaVine, who put on a show. It came as no surprise when the Magic exercised their team option to keep him for a third year. And although his averages would drop just a bit, you could attribute that to the fact that that Magic team was stuffing the stat sheet equally, with Vucevic as their leading scorer after averaging 18 a game. He would then spend a year in OKC after getting traded and play the role of the second option behind an MVP Russell Westbrook. But his time there would be cut short when the Thunder traded him and Domantas Sabonis over to the Indiana Pacers, and this is where Oladipo went from good to great. In the 2017-2018 season, he would lead the league in steals, shoot 48% from the field and 38% from three, with a crazy 23 points per game as an elite two-way threat. He went on to win the NBA Most Improved Player award and made All-NBA and All-Defensive teams. Indiana seemed to be the place for him, and he was blossoming before our very eyes. In the next season, things were looking good once again. But after missing 11 games due to a knee injury, and ultimately most of the season after rupturing his quad tendon that January, Oladipo had been slowed down. He would still be selected to that All-Star game as a reserve regardless, but rupturing that tendon would prove to be catastrophic. It was a long road to recovery for Oladipo, but some time rehabbing, he would get a chance to play again in January of 2020 and would get back up to speed, but after a 27-point season-high performance on March 10th, the pandemic would put the league to a grinding halt. He would be able to play in the league, restart, but he couldn't do enough to stop his team from getting swept by the Heat in the bubble, scoring 18 a game while shooting 39% from the floor for that series. After just 9 games with the Pacers in the next season, Indiana parted ways with the athletic guard, trading him to Houston as part of a 4-team deal that sent Harden to Brooklyn. He would begin his Rockets career by dropping 32, and it looked like vintage Depot was back. He would play well enough with the team to be offered a 2-year max extension worth around $45 million, but he turned it down as he was looking for more of a long-term deal. So what did Houston do? They traded him to the Heat. However, that quad tendon issue was still hindering his playing time as well as his athleticism, and eventually he would be shut down for the rest of the season due to another surgery, which also kept him out for most of next season. And because of this, teams were willing to pay him the big bucks, and so we'd have to settle for a minimum deal with the Heat. And I bet he was wishing that he had taken that max extension from the Rockets at this point, because given his condition, that was the best deal he was going to find. He would play in just 8 games in that next season with limited minutes and work hard enough to get a 2-year, $18 million deal, which is kinda just back pay for his past performances. But as you could probably guess, injuries hindered him in that next season, averaging 10 points per game. Oladipo would appear in just 42 games, but looked to be ready for the Heat's playoff run that year. He would play in just 8 games that next season with limited minutes. After this point, Oladipo was officially a shell of himself. As an elite two-way player who primarily reached greatness due to his athletic ability, once you took that away from him, he was just somewhat of an inconsistent, inefficient guard that was undersized for his position. The question of whether or not Oladipo could be seen in an NBA uniform at this point is uncertain, but the history of injury after injury is hard to overlook, and is certainly the reason as to why Victor Oladipo completely fell off a cliff after that elite season in Indiana. When you talk about pure defensive threats over the course of NBA history, there's one guy that definitely doesn't get enough recognition, and that was Andre Roberson. Roberson was taken by the Thunder in the first round of the 2013 draft after terrorizing the Pac-12 with his defense at Colorado. He was seen as a defensive virtuoso with raw and untapped talent. At 6'7", he didn't exactly have a set position. Out of high school, he was classified as a power forward, but by the time he got to the league, the Thunder threw him in at the shooting guard position. But really, it didn't even matter. because that is where Roberson became one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. Offensive beast that he was assigned to struggled greatly, and so it didn't take long for Roberson to earn a permanent starting spot in the Thunder's rotation. His numbers weren't staggering. Shit, in his first full year as a starter, he averaged 3.4 points per game, but that didn't worry OKC because his job wasn't to score. His job was to smother opponents, and he did that well. He wouldn't really get his minutes bumped up though until his 4th season. Averaging 30 minutes a game, Roberson made a difference in ways that showed in places other than just the stat sheet. There were glaring differences between his time on the court and his time off of it. Although he averaged just 5 rebounds when he was on the floor, his team had an 8.6% rebounding differential and 4.3 when he was off. He was forcing misses and keeping people off the glass. There were signs that the other team was heavily affected. With Roberson on the court, the opposing team's offensive rating sat at 106.2, but when he was off, their offensive rating sat at 111. To put that into perspective, the opposition had an offensive rating that would have put them in 22nd place with Andre on the floor, but when he was absent, they would have been the 7th worst defense in the NBA. Another thing that made Roberson so valuable is that it let his teammates like Russ and later Paul George rest a bit on defense, because he had no problem doing all the work. Roberson was able to take on the load of guarding guys on the perimeter and lighten the load that the Stars had to carry. Now all of this is good, but having Roberson on the courts did come at a cost. You see, he was an offensive liability, and this showed in the 2017 playoffs when the Houston Rockets took advantage of Roberson's god-awful free throw shooting. Across the series, Roberson would go 3 for 21 from the line, and well, the stat says it all. Sure, Roberson made life hell for his opponents, but they made life hell for him on offense. And with how close games 2 through 5 were in that series, the Rockets intentionally fouling Roberson could have very well been the X factor. And don't get me started on his 3-point shooting, which hovered around 25% throughout his career. I mean, at some point, the guy should have just stopped shooting or hit the gym for once in his life. But nevertheless, he was the perfect defender. He would make an all-defensive team in that 16-17 season, but that would be the pinnacle of his career. That summer, he signed a 3-year, $30 million deal, which was crazy for a guy with no offensive game, but in the first season of his contract, he unfortunately ruptured his patella tendon. He would be ruled out for the season after that injury in January, but could not stay healthy enough to come back at all that next season either. He would finally be able to come back after the COVID restart, which was over 2.5 years after his original injury, which of course meant that he wasn't going to be his old self or even really be remembered in the same way. He would just get to play 7 games that season, but would not get signed to a team until February of the next, and would get 2 games in before being waived. He would sign a 10-day contract with the team soon after, but once that ran out, he couldn't find a team willing to sign him on. He would spend time playing with the Thunder's G League affiliate, but would eventually end up playing overseas in France, where he currently plays to this day. His story shows off the fragility of athletes, especially ones that are dependent on their natural given ability, and once that's taken away, their career can go up in smoke. But because he was able to play at his best for such a short amount of time, it seems like people are forgetting Andre Roberson and the hard work that he put in to guard some of the best that the league has ever seen. The Pacers in the early 2010s were incredible, with guys like Paul George before he started his shitty-ass podcast, Danny Granger, and Lance Stevenson at the forefront. Someone that people tend to forget is none other than the man in the middle, Roy Hibbert. Drafted by the Pacers out of Georgetown University, Hibbert made himself known quickly with his elite rim protection as a defensive anchor for Indiana. He took advantage of the verticality rule, and he made that the center of his game. And shit, it worked. As long as he went up and down and didn't initiate contact, he wasn't going to be punished, and he violated people under the rule. In his first 2 years in a starting role with Indiana, Hibbert would average something like 12 points, 7 boards, and a couple of assists. But what really mattered was the impact that he made defensively on the floor. Nobody wanted to go toe-to-toe with the 7'2" Hibbert in the paint when he's treeing up right under the basket. But it wouldn't be until his 4th season in the league that he really started to get recognized for it. Averaging 13-9 and 2 blocks a game, Hibbert would get invited to play in the All-Star game. To be fair, there weren't a lot of big men dominating at the East in this time, but that shouldn't discredit any of the work that Hibbert was putting in for this team. Really, his stats didn't even matter, because not only was the Pacers' defense benefiting from Hibbert being on the courts, but their offense was too. During that first All-Star season, Pacers would have a plus 4.6 offensive rating differential. And when the Pacers got to the playoffs, he kept that same intensity, averaging a double-double in both playoff series before inevitably getting knocked out by Bron and the Heat. That next season was nothing different. Hibbert stayed dominant, but honestly, what really put him in the category of great big men of that time was the 2013 Eastern Conference Finals, where he averaged 22 and 10 while pushing the Heat to 7 games that series. It was a masterclass, as he led his team in points, rebounds, and blocks throughout that 7 games. And if things hadn't gone different in that Game 7, we'd probably be talking about Roy Hibbert a lot more than we do now. He built a fortress in the paint and didn't let anyone come close to challenging him. And in terms of countering the Heat, which were the bad boys of the league and the best team in the NBA, a big-body center like this could expose the one true flaw in their system. He would go on to get into the All-Star game for the second time in the next season and ride his defensive expertise to a second place in Defensive Player of the Year voting. But partway through that season, something started to change. Prior to March that year, Hibbert was looking like the same guy that the Pacers had grown to love during his time there. But once March hit, a terrible slump began, and his production started to slide, and quickly, averaging just 8 and 4 off of less than 40% shooting. This slump would continue into the playoffs as he would average 5.3 points and 4.7 boards per game in the first round, which made a near playoff hero look like a complete joke. Shit, the guy literally had 4 0-point performances in those playoffs alone. The next season, Hibbert would be looked at in a harsher light with the loss of Paul George, and after his struggles showed not to just be a slump, but a complete decline, it was clear that Hibbert's game was just not what it once had been. Sure, he was a slower big man in a league that had become more and more fast-paced by the year, but there had to have been something else. As former teammate David West put it was all mental. With the rise of social media and the scrutiny that it brought with it, there were bound to be some players that were affected more than others, and Hibbert was one of them. But to be fair, if you were a cornerstone center for a team nowadays and had 4 performances with 0 points, you wouldn't be able to open your phone without seeing some pretty terrible things said about you. And then there were the memos that had been put out about verticality and about how some people, cough cough, Hibbert, were taking advantage of certain aspects of the rule. Simply, the NBA had begun to abandon the ways of Roy Hibbert, and after one more 10-7 season with the team, Hibbert would be moved to LA where he would find little to no success. Well, at least he was able to play center for Kobe Bryant's final season in the NBA, so something good came of it, but averaging 6 and 5 while starting the entire season? Really? He would end up spending one more year in the NBA with 2 different teams, but over the course of 4 seasons, he had gone from a 27-year-old multi-time All-Star to an afterthought that would soon be out of the league. He would retire a little over a year after playing his final game, but it must have come as a major shock. There's no doubt that Hibbert had been passed up in some way in the NBA. He was slower and could be taken advantage of, and really just brings up the question on whether he was a star in the league or just a star in a very specific system that was built exactly to his strong suit. When you think about the runs that the 2000s Lakers put together, your mind immediately goes to Kobe Bryant, Pau Gasol, or maybe Lamar Odom. But there were certainly some other guys who put in work for that team that seemed to be forgotten, and Andrew Bynum is certainly the best example. Bynum was drafted in 2005 as a 17-year-old out of high school, and was seen as a bit of a risky pick because of the lack of high-level competition that he had faced. But it had worked before, so fans had high hopes for the 7-footer. The Lakers hired Kareem to work with him, and with elite mentorship coming via Kobe Bryant and Phil Jackson as well, Bynum was on a fast track for success. He would play sparsely in his rookie season, but would start off his sophomore year as the starter due to some injuries within the team. His progression was glaring, and he was on track after averaging 8 and 6 with 1.6 blocks that season. The next year, he would struggle with some injuries after dislocating his kneecap and wouldn't come back at all that season. But in the process, the Lakers went after Pau Gasol, which proved to be the perfect complement on the block next to Bynum. Prior to his injury that season, Bynum was averaging a double-double and over 2 blocks a game, and the idea was that he would come back stronger the next season. Alongside Gasol, he would create the best frontcourt duo in the league and help the Lakers win their first championship since the Kobe Shaq days once he was able to recover. He provided crucial size and critical rim protection as an interior defensive anchor, shutting down Dwight Howard to just 15 points. But because he played alongside Pau and Kobe, some of the biggest stars in that era, people sort of forget about him. He would go on to help the Lakers win a second title just 1 year later, but even then, he wasn't able to play a full season due to some minor setbacks. But 2 years later, he would finally hit what looked like his prime. In his 7th season, still as a 24-year-old, He would average 18 and 12 with 2 blocks per game on sky-high efficiency. He was exactly the kind of player that the Lakers were wanting, and the best thing was he was still so young and on the upswing. So many people believed that he had plenty of room to improve. Shaq himself even declared Bynum as the best big man in the entire NBA. And while that is debatable with guys like Dwight Howard in that era, you can start to see the hype that started forming around Andrew Bynum. He would go on to average 17 and 11 in the playoffs that season, and had it not been for an insane Thunder team, maybe they could have had a go at another title. Although Bynum was looking like he could be a big piece of the Lakers' future, there was another big man who the Lakers wanted more: Dwight Howard. And I mean, who could blame them? Howard had already won 3 Defensive Player of the Year awards and almost won an MVP, and had already been to 6 All-Star games in comparison to Bynum's 1. And so, when the Lakers got their chance to take a swing at Howard, they didn't turn away, and traded Bynum to Philly in a 4-team deal, which got Howard to LA. And that's where the problems really began. He started feeling some discomfort in his knees, and it just kept getting worse. The Sixers began holding Bynum out of basketball activities. He would do additional harm to his knees when he was fucking bowling, and after the All-Star break had passed, Bynum still hadn't made an appearance. He would end up getting season-ending surgery and never play a game with the Sixers as his contract was up and he wanted to go elsewhere. He would end up signing a pretty solid deal with the Cavaliers in the 2013 offseason that would be worth just $6 million guaranteed over 2 years, but up to nearly $25 million if things worked out. But they would far from work out. In his time with the Lakers, he shot an efficient 56% from the floor, but once he got to Cleveland, his efficiency fell off a cliff. He was still putting up shots, 8.5 a game, but he was shooting 42% from the floor. It was then that reports started coming out from within the Cavaliers camp that Bynum didn't even give a shit about basketball. The game reportedly held no joy for Bynum, and he would quickly become a horrible locker room presence. In December, he would be suspended by the team for detrimental conduct, which came after a terrible practice which consisted of Bynum just chucking up shots from wherever he got the ball on the court, whether it was in his range or not. And so, it came as no surprise when Bynum was traded to the Bulls along with a haul that gave Cleveland Luol Deng. No team is going to want to take on the Bynum contract, especially after his Cleveland crash out. But the best thing about his contract was that the Bulls could save almost $20 million if they waived him, and so they did. He would sign with the Pacers less than a month after and was expected to be a backup for Roy Hibbert, but his knees started flaring up once again, and he would play just 2 games with Indiana, and would never make an NBA team again. His presence was bad, his knees were really bad, and although he wasn't even close to 30 yet, Bynum just wasn't seen as an asset anymore. Had his knees been normal, or had he given a shit about basketball after his body started to betray him, we may be telling a different story, but that's sadly not the case. When you go back to the days of the 2000s, old school floor generals Deron Williams would come up as an example. After being drafted 3rd overall in 2005, Williams would look like a future superstar, snagging the starting role halfway through his rookie season. He was able to lead the Jazz to the Western Conference Finals in 2007 alongside Carlos Boozer at just 22 years old, and it was looking like Williams could be the next big thing for the franchise. He was reliable, quick, and had great floor vision, and in his 3rd season would drop 19 points off of extremely efficient scoring from the field and averaged 10.5 assists to go along with that. He was drafted 1 pick before Chris Paul, who honestly had a similar play style, so naturally there was a rivalry between the two. Somehow, Williams didn't make it to an All-Star game in his first 4 seasons, despite getting voted to the All-NBA second team in his 3rd campaign. But he let his game do the talking. He was putting up John Stockton-type numbers, and seemed to know the game like the back of his hand. He would finally get that All-Star nod in his 5th season while averaging 19 and 10 for the 3rd year in a row. There were legit debates about him and Chris Paul, and rightly so, but the next season, things went sour for Utah. First head coach Jerry Sloan resigned midway through a 31-23 season, and although the rumor was that Williams forced him out, that was never confirmed. The next piece of the puzzle to leave would be Williams himself, when the Jazz shipped him to New Jersey for a major haul. You see, Williams' contract was up, and there was no confirmation about whether or not he would re-sign, so the Jazz bit the bullet and gave up on him before he could give up on them. It would take some time for Williams to settle it, with his shooting percentage dropping from 46 to 35%. But on the bright side, he was averaging about 3 more assists per game. The next season, he would get back into a groove, averaging a career-high 21, which was enough for a 3rd straight All-Star appearance. And he would also get to be a part of his 2nd Olympic team too that summer. It seemed like Williams was committed to the Nets after signing a 5-year, $98 million deal that offseason. But bit by bit, he started to dwindle. While he was committed to the Nets team on paper, he started gaining weight and couldn't stay completely healthy. Now, there were still games with the Nets that kept him looking like one of the best in the game, but more often than not in Brooklyn, he was just good, not great. His low moment with the team came in the 2014-2015 season when, after some struggles, he was forced to fight to keep his starting spot with Jarrett Jack. He averaged 13 and 6 on 39% shooting, and at that point, had long thrown away the idea that he was on the level of a guy like Chris Paul. And I guess it was bad enough to warrant a split because the Nets would waive Deron, who received a buyout for the remaining 2 years of his contract. He would then find a new home in Dallas, but that didn't solve any problems for him, and he continued to lack efficiency. He would spend a couple of years there, but have similar production to his latter years with the Nets. After averaging 10 plus assists year after year, it really was odd to see him just have 10 assists 4 times in an entire season while playing over 30 minutes a game. After a year and a half with the Mavs, he would be waived once again and signed with the Cavaliers, where he would spend his final games as a backup to Kyrie Irving on their 2017 Finals run, and would be out of the league at 32, while Chris Paul is still doing it, pushing 40. Really, the downfall of Deron Williams was somewhat self-caused due to his weight really hindering his athletic ability, which was such a major part of his game, as well as the injuries stacking up, giving a people's elbow to the remainder of his career. The bubble was a weird asterisk in NBA history, but throughout the abnormalities, it gave us some pretty damn good basketball. Players were balling without the pressure of thousands of fans in the stands, which produced crazy performances and unusual stars. And the one that pops out more than any was TJ Warren. Warren came into the league in 2014 as a scoring threat out of NC State and showed glimpses of what he could be in his first 2 years with the Suns. Shooting above 50% in both of those seasons, Warren made the most of the time that he got. He was a pure scorer, even though he was a 3-point shooter in any way. To be honest, he was pretty horrible from beyond the arc in the beginning, shooting as low as 22%. Some people call him one-dimensional, but if he was scoring with that high of an efficiency, it didn't really matter. His touch around the rim and mid-range proficiency was where his value lied. This was on full display when he was finally able to fight himself into the Suns' starting lineup in the 2017 season. He was the 3rd leading scorer behind Eric Bledsoe and Devin Booker, and he didn't need to take the ball out of either of their hands to do so. In the next season, Eric Bledsoe getting moved, Warren would have more of a scoring opportunity and capitalize on it. After signing a 4-year extension with the team, he would average 19 and 5 and was showing bits of movement on his game apart from just the scoring aspect. And then came the next season where out of nowhere TJ Warren developed a 3-point shot. He went from shooting 1.4 a game to 4.2, and he was making them, as his 3-point percentage nearly doubled from 22 to 42. He averaged 18 and 4 and probably would have averaged more had the Suns played him more than just 23 minutes in his first 9 games of the season, as his per 36 minute numbers sat at just above 20 points per game. And had it not been for an injury that kept him out for the second half of the season, who knows what he could have done by the end of the year. Sure, his defense and rebounding was about average for his position, and his passing was pretty poor, but Warren was getting buckets, dude. And even though that was the case, the Suns would move on from the pure scorer in the 2019 offseason, trading him away to the Indiana Pacers. There, he would keep doing his thing to a high level, scoring 18 a game on 53, 37, and 81 shooting splits prior to the halts that the pandemic brought. And if I can remember it right, no one saw what was coming once the NBA was brought to the bubble. Players were unsure about playing in empty arenas and being in isolation for weeks on end. But then you have the other guys, and TJ Warren was one of those guys who started off his bubble campaign by scoring 53 fucking points. It was one of those performances that really made you think. Sure, there's the occasional random 50 bomb like Malachi Flynn, Corey Brewer, or Mo Williams, but this one wasn't the same. Without Domantas Sabonis or Malcolm Brogdon, Warren was the clear-cut number 1 option, and he took full advantage of that. He would end up averaging 31 points across the regular season portion of the bubble, while shooting 52% from 3, which was nowhere near sustainable, but still, you can't deny that it was one of the greatest Linsanity type of runs we've seen in a while. I mean, in just a 6-game span, he dropped 53, 39, 34, and 32. The Pacers would end up getting swept by the red-hot Heat in the first round, but the idea of a TJ Warren that still had room to improve was salivating for Pacers fans. But after just 4 games of the next season, Warren would be ruled out with a stress fracture in his foot, which would end up being season-ending. But not just for that season, as he would miss nearly the entirety of the next season after dealing with multiple surgeries and the recovery which came from that. He would be able to sign with the Nets for the 2022-2023 season, but we all know that someone who missed nearly 2 entire seasons isn't going to come back the same, and that was certainly the case for TJ Warren. He would end up playing backup for the KD Kyrie Nets for most of the season before moving back to Phoenix. Compared to the 2020 season, Warren had averaged about half as many minutes with half as many shots, but he also wasn't as efficient as he once was. He was shooting a near career low from the field and had lost the luxury of a 40+ percentage 3-point shot. He would end up signing a 10-day and staying on with the T-Wolves last season, but hasn't been able to find a spot in the league since. His story was another one riddled with injuries, sadly. Many players his age have been able to stick around the league for longer, but you can't just overlook the fact that Warren's injury took him out for over 2 years, and right after he started looking like an all-star at that. Derek Favors was a highly touted prospect after going one and done for Georgia Tech and was given player comps with guys like Al Horford, so just a reliable, consistent big man. The team that drafted him, the New Jersey Nets, would only get to enjoy about a half a season with him before trading him away in that Darren Williams deal, but he quickly found himself at home in Utah. Sitting behind and learning from fellow power forward Paul Millsap for the first 3 years of his career, Favors would become your everyday backup big. But after 3 years, it was clear that it was Favors' time to pick up some slack. The frontcourt duo of Al Jefferson and Paul Millsap had stuck around, but struggled to find success in Utah, and so after both of the two moved on in the 2013 offseason, Favors would get the key to the castle alongside Gordon Hayward. But that team had some things to work on, as they went 25-57 with their new look squad. As a second-year starter in the 14-15 season, Favors would average 16-8 and get his frontcourt complement to Rudy Gobert, who gave the Jazz a huge boost in size and defensive ability. In the next season, he would provide similar results, dropping another 16-8 while shooting above 50% from the field, which helped Utah get dangerously close to a playoff nod. His versatility as a 6'9" big man was a nightmare for opposing teams who wanted to play some sort of small ball style of play. He could guard players smaller than him or bigger and cemented himself as a sort of combo big man in the league. On offense, he began creating a good number of shots for himself and feasted on big guys who were typically just a bit slower than he was. And when you pair that with Rudy Gobert holding it down in the paint, what you come up with is a pretty scary duo. But then came, as you could probably guess, some injury issues. Going into the 2016-2017 season, fans wondered if Favors would make an all-star push. But after missing some chunks at the beginning and later at the end, it was clear that that wasn't going to be the case. And in many of those games where he was able to play, he was limited. His production went down, and even when it came to playoff time, Favors couldn't be relied on. And the next season, he would come up with pretty much the most average stat line with 12 points and 7 boards, and all the talk around him and the potential that he possibly had was completely gone. He would go and spend 1 year in New Orleans before deciding to come back to Utah, who offered him a 3-year, $27 million contract to come and be Rudy Gobert's backup. And to be fair, as backup centers go, he was what you want. He was over 60% from the field, averaging 5 and 5, while the French big man rested on the bench, and on paper put up the most offensively efficient season he had ever had with an offensive rating of 138. He quietly did what his team asked him to do, and he won back the hearts of Jazz fans, but he was just a memory of his older self. He wasn't as good defensively, but when teams found Favors as an opportunity to get their big man the ball in the absence of Gobert, that is probably going to be the case. But after just 1 season with Utah, he would be shipped off to OKC, where he would once again struggle with injuries before being traded and then waived. To put it simply, Favors was never the same after the injuries started hitting him, which seems to be a trend with a lot of these guys. It's unfortunate, but more often than not, when you remember a guy who suddenly disappeared, it would probably be a pretty safe bet that the injury bugs started to creep in. The few players have gone from up next to a has-been, like Larry Sanders did with the Bucks in the early 2010s. After being drafted 15th overall by the Bucks, Sanders would establish himself as the best up-and-coming shot blocker in the NBA. He was a pure defensive talent, and while he didn't have an offensive game early on, there was hope that he could develop that, which could turn him into a deadly weapon at the center position. He would finally snag the starting job in the early stages of his third season and average the second most blocks in the NBA behind only Serge Ibaka. When he was on the floor, defenses struggled much more than they had. When he was on the floor, offenses struggled much more than when he was not, with a near 6-point drop in offensive efficiency rating. His per 36 averages jumped from 10 and 9 to 13 and 12 as his offensive game became serviceable, going from averaging 3.5 shots on 45% to 8.5 shots while shooting 50%. Taking all of this into account, it really shouldn't come as a surprise that he was able to finish in third place in Most Improved Player voting, and it paid off. The Bucks would reward him that offseason by signing him to a 4-year, $44 million extension, which seemed like a good deal at the time. But it would end up biting them in the ass because after just 3 games the next season, Sanders would be sidelined for 25 games after tearing a ligament in his thumb in a nightclub fight. His return to action would have him looking a bit worse than the prior season, averaging 8 and 8 in 20 games. But after that, he would be ruled out for the season with a fractured orbital bone, and in the time of his injury, he would be caught violating the NBA's marijuana policy, but the suspension he got would coincide with his inactive games due to his injury. It was great to see Sanders come out playing at the opening of the next season, as he put up numbers similar to a shortened season the year before, averaging 7 and 6 with slightly diminished minutes. But on defense, he wasn't making as much of a difference. Opposing offenses actually played better when he was on the courts than off, which took away nearly all his worth. He wasn't racking up blocks, and the brilliance of his rim protection just wasn't what it used to be. He would all of a sudden be placed on the inactive roster that December after just 27 games for personal reasons, and while he would be seen later on that season on the bench, he wouldn't suit up again. He would also be hit with another drug violation in January, and in February, the Bucks announced that they would be buying out the rest of Sanders' contract. A video was released not long after in which Sanders would explain that he was part of a hospital program to deal with anxiety and depression, and that while he still loved the game of basketball, he wanted to focus on his mental health. He wouldn't play the next season, but returned the season after that to play 5 games with the Cleveland Cavaliers, where his last stint in the NBA would reside. He has since played in a couple of other leagues like the Big Three or in Taiwan, but the fact that he only got to play in the NBA for 6 years and only in 70 plus games once feels kind of odd, especially given the level of production he gave the Bucks in that one season. Eric Bledsoe was a guy who came into the league with elite quickness, hyper-athleticism, and a tough defensive mind. He would be traded on draft night to play alongside fellow rookie Blake Griffin in his first season, and played backup to a mixture of Mo Williams and Baron Davis, and even get a couple of starts sprinkled in throughout the year with the Clippers. He had a pretty solid rookie year by all standards, other than his 27% three-point shooting. But after Chris Paul came to LA to take over the starting role, he would get to learn from one of, if not the best point guard in the game. As a result, Bledsoe's minutes would drop significantly, but between that season and the next, Bledsoe would see boosts in many areas of his game. He went from 39, 20, 63 shooting splits to 45, 40, and 79 in just one season. And although the Clippers' offense wasn't even close to as efficient with Bledsoe on the courts compared to Paul, the other team's offense worsened as well. His athleticism was put on full display, which gave way for his nickname, the Mini LeBron. But that season, Bledsoe would be traded to Phoenix, where he would take on a starting role where he would really begin to show off what he had to offer. In his first year with the Suns, he would average nearly 18 points, 6 assists, and 5 rebounds per game, and brought that same level of defensive intensity with him as well. He would end up missing nearly half the season after shin and meniscus injuries, but his play would be enough for the Suns to extend him with a 5-year, $70 million deal. They loved the way he could run an offense, guard guys bigger than him, and shock his opponents with glaring and unusual athleticism. And the next season, he would keep up the same production, leading the Suns in win shares, averaging 20 a game throughout his first 31 contests alongside new rookie phenom and Devin Booker. But halfway through the season, he would undergo knee surgery and would be sidelined once again. Now, the Suns weren't exactly contenders, with Bledsoe not having him on the court showed, as they won just 11 games throughout the rest of the season. However, once again, he would bounce back and have the best season of his career in the next one. In his first nearly full season with Booker, he would average 21, 6, and 5, and it looked like he had finally solidified himself as a reliable, if not borderline elite point guard in the NBA. His chemistry with Booker was undeniable, but 3 games into the next season, things got weird. Bledsoe tweeted out, "I don't want to be here," and while he claimed that it was about a hair salon, he would later be suspended from team activities and fined by the NBA. And just a couple of weeks later, he would be traded to the Milwaukee Bucks to put an end to the honestly kind of stupid drama. But on the bright side, he was going to get to play with Giannis, and who wouldn't want that? The Bucks also got what they wanted, a real point guard, as the year before they had been running it with Dellavedova at point. And for a while, it looked like Bledsoe was the guy that they wanted, as they would end up signing him to a 4-year contract extension during his tenure. But something just wasn't the same. He wasn't the 20-point-per-game demon that he was on the Suns. Additionally, when it mattered most in the playoffs, he just didn't show up, which included shooting below 30% in a crucial Eastern Conference Finals appearance in 2019. His athleticism was waning with age already, and he wasn't a good shooter whatsoever. With Milwaukee, he never once shot above 35% from 3, and his points and steals averages dropped as well. He'd go on to be traded to New Orleans and finally the Clippers for one last ride, and although he was able to pick up a starting job at times for both teams, mini LeBron was fading and would end up exiting the league after another injury. Now, Joe Harris came into the league after 4 years at Virginia and was seen as one of the better shooters in the draft, but nothing that special. He had spent a couple of mediocre seasons by all standards in Cleveland with very little runtime and would end up getting traded to Orlando and then waived. But in the 2016 offseason, he would end up signing with the Brooklyn Nets, who saw something in him, untapped shooting potential. It wasn't really until his second year with the team when people started noticing that something was different about this guy, especially after he averaged 30 points in a sharpshooting masterclass. You see, this Nets team offered Harris something he didn't have anywhere else, a real role other than just sitting on the end of the bench, and he sure as hell took advantage of it. And in his 3rd season with the team as a full-time starter, he took things to the next level. Harris led the league in 3-point percentage, knocking them down at 48%. And when he was on the court, you could tell as the Nets offense was much more put together and fluid. He would be a huge part of why the Nets were able to make the playoffs that season. You know, back when the Nets were fun, as people like to say. Harris would be more than rewarded for his 3-point shooting, as he would sign a 4-year, $75 million extension. Eventually, the Nets would go out and get some stars in Kyrie, KD, and James Harden, of course, and that was when Harris would reach his peak. He would thrive off the ball in the first season of the new Nets era, leading the league in 3-point percentage once again. He was a statistical anomaly with how efficient he was able to knock down triples, making over 3 per game. It was just pure ethical hoops. In 2021, he surpassed Jason Kidd to become the leading 3-point shooter in Nets history while shooting above 45% for the 5th year in a row. But at the end of that, he would suffer a left ankle injury that would cut his season short. And his absence was felt. The turmoil of that whole Nets team was insane. I mean, the big 3 that the basketball world was raving over was not what people thought it would be. At least one of those guys seemed to always be hurt, and well, if not KD's shoe size being one too big, maybe we would have seen that team do something special, but they wouldn't. The next season, Harris would be up and running once again, but was given a lesser role. His minutes dropped by more than 10 per game. Sure, he wasn't shooting it lights out as he used to, but he wasn't bad by any means. Most players would kill to shoot 42% from 3, but for Harris, it somehow seemed like a down year. That offseason, Harris would be traded to the Pistons in a salary dump, and would spend just a short time there before being waived and picking up a few games here and there. He would ultimately retire that offseason, but Harris' story was an interesting one. Players have declined, sure, but Harris just fell off the face of the basketball world, never to be seen again. His skills were extremely valuable at his peak, but once he had declined, came somewhat easy to replace. Thank you for watching if you made it this far. Subscribe if you're new. We're trying to hit 100,000 by the end of the year. And as always, I'll see you boys in the next one. Peace out.